API Resilience Podcast. It's our belief that APIs are central in the changing business landscape that has been named digital transformation, and that digital transformation through APIs offers the opportunity for a dramatic shift in how companies can work together and participate in creating value. We've invited guests from many different types of organizations and asked them to share insights from their journeys and their API programs, as well as the challenges, objectives, and approaches as they endeavor to make their companies and communities more resilient. Hello, and welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. I'm Mark Winberry, co-hosting this podcast for the last time with Kristof and Tomme. So we don't have a guest today other than me, I guess. And we're going to reflect on the things that we've learned over all of the interviews that we've had and the discussions that we've had. As for me, 2020 was quite the year for me personally. COVID was, made it bad for everyone, but it was a difficult year. And I need to move on and do some different things. And it's been a joy working with Kristof, and I've loved doing this podcast. And I will miss it, but I'll still be listening. So be careful what you say about me, Kristof.
I won't say anything bad about you, of course. Why would I? No. I'll be missing having you as my co-host. I think sometimes it helped to keep some balance, to not just to go all the way too deep into the philosophy bunny hole. So it's going to be interesting to do this balancing exercise in the next couple of episodes that I'm planning to do on my own. So we have to see how that works. So I'd love to hear what you think, what I'm brewing of it.
I think that from my perspective, I think we were very successful in the past. I was looking at our first episode dropped in June of 2020. And I think during the darkest times of COVID, we were talking to plenty of people who had great stories to tell. And I think that essentially the title of the show was a hypothesis. We didn't call it that, but it was a hypothesis, and we tested that hypothesis through these interviews, and I think it was proven true. And so, I think there's still a lot to talk about, but the philosophy is also interesting. So don't fight yourself too much.
I'm always wondering, it is, well, it's the nature of the beast. That this is translation from a Dutch saying, het aard van het beestje, which sounds a lot better than the beast. It's like the little beast, or like kind of like...
We would say it in English, yeah.
Okay, so
it's not bad.
Okay, good. So I'm naturally drawn to it because, well, I'm always looking for patterns. Mm-hmm. And trying to find patterns between what we're doing in the API world and the natural world is incredibly fascinating, because I think we're in an unprecedented time where things just keep going faster and faster, and we are reshaping what it means to be human. And thinking deeply about that in the first place can give you an advantage as an organization or as an individual, but it can also hopefully help steer us away from some of the worst outcomes that we might end up into. Practically, I think humanity is becoming a superorganism, and we are even more than we have been before. We are integrating individuals into a larger whole, and you can do that in a lot of really bad ways, but it could also be done in a lot of really good ways. And my hope is that we as an ecosystem and as a community and as a company can be a part of steering us towards a world where we can be even more human, while also be more a single whole that is collaborating as humanity. That's my wish, and this is why I'm super fascinated by this industry and what we're doing. But of course, like a lot of the people we work with are very much centered in industry and in business. And then, yeah, you need to be a little bit careful that it doesn't become too much woo-woo, because then you might be overshooting what you're trying to achieve.
Just in the same way that Pronovix found our niche in developer portals, I think there's definitely a niche that you speak to with the philosophical viewpoint. And for people who might just be hearing this episode, Kristof is a biologist by training and schooling. He's also deeply philosophical and very interested in big thoughts, and he connects them all together beautifully. It's really been fun. Have a beer with him if you haven't. Do you know the Peanuts cartoon from the U.S.?
Mm-mm.
The U.S. audience will get this, but there's a character. It's a comic strip about kids, and there's kind of a smart girl. Sometimes she can be annoying, and I'm not saying that about you. Her name is Lucy, and she often sets up instead of a Kool-Aid stand, it's like a counseling stand where you come and pay her to hear your problems and get answers. So you could open a pub there in Ghent, the API Philosophy Pub or something.
I'm not sure if we get a lot of visitors. It would be like this hyper select audience. Like
I'm telling you, and it's the niche. You nailed it. So yeah, between your beers are so good there that I don't think you'd have any problems getting people in there.
Just start with shots. Just get people talking. It's like keeping yourself honest, because there's I can see the everything is connected to everything deep end, where just things become meaningless because it's just, I think that there's that thin edge of balance between everything is disconnected and everything is connected, and life is on that thin edge. And like and really good ideas are on that thin edge, because if you connect too much, then you end up with just word soup, and that might get people might get people's brains firing all over the place, but there's nothing useful coming out of it. It's almost like poetry, I would say. Like it's a creative act of trying to find new connections while you're talking with people. And I think those are the best episodes, actually, when we've been talking with some of our guests, and then new ideas come out, and we step away from the conversation on both ends, having learned something, or sometimes maybe even discovered something in our own heads that we didn't know was there before. And I think those are those magical moments that I really enjoy having, and I think this is what this podcast is about.
I'm thinking through the variety of guests that we've had, and we have people who are building their first API program to people who are API industry luminaries, and it's been fascinating to talk to such a broad spectrum of people, and also the number of verticals. And we talked to government, and when we talked to Mark Boyd at Platformable, the work he's doing with the financial industry and the regulatory requirements that they have and the APIs that they produced, it's just been really fascinating to see so many different viewpoints and so many people from so many places. I think for me, the conversations that stuck the most, a number of people made very emphatic statements or assertions, and some of those were they resonated with me. Some of them kind of shocked me. Those were the ones that really connected with me whenever I was kind of knocked off balance by the assertion, and and made to think in a different way. The stories that we heard, though, were also very instructive as people described their individual experiences. And I know that we often looked for a few things, just thinking about some of the things that started emerging as themes, is that, a good API program will surprise you. That's definitely a takeaway for me, is that you should definitely have a plan of what you're trying to achieve and some goals you're trying to achieve, but prepare to be surprised.
Like, for example, when Mehdi Medjawin said that, how did he say it?
People don't look for APIs. They look for capabilities that solve the problem, who hopefully are delivered by APIs. But if they are delivered by magic, they will take it.
Developers don't look for APIs. They look for capabilities. That was like, boom.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
He dropped a lot of serious things. And another thing that Mehdi said was something about technology is not politically agnostic. I tell people whenever I describe software development, especially to business people who are non-developers, whenever software developers are sitting down, it's not the magic incantation that you imagine them typing that's important. It's not the foreign language that they know that you don't know. It's their ability to translate business problems and codify them in code. And in the same way that you can identify someone's philosophy and their writing, it's hard for them to keep their bias out. That really resonated with me whenever Mehdi said that, because everything is political in the US right now. Things that shouldn't be political are political. And when he said that, I was like, wow, that's, I think he's right. And in the same way you can identify, people's writings using Markov chains and things like that, the paradigm of the language, the viewpoint of the company, the perspective of the developer, and all of those things tie together. And politics is definitely one of them. And to me, that was like, wow. And he went on to talk about personal data, and that may have been something he said during that segment when he talked about the importance of GDPR and personal data. That was fascinating.
We also had some people where we started having a conversation and then it turned out that we should have like follow-up conversations. We even had one conversation that we did twice, and then the second time it ran so long that it actually turned out into 2 episodes with Kinlane. And yeah, we had a few other people where we had really good conversations that were like, okay, we have to come back and we have to do another episode.
I agree. And I remember that it was rare for us to be ready to stop talking whenever it was time to stop talking, because I know that we've experimented a little bit with length, and we'd love to hear from our listeners to know what you think the right length is. I think that we ran kind of long, but it was because we were having such good conversations, and it's really hard to cut up a good conversation and still keep the flow. There are definitely so many conversations that deserve follow-up, so I hope you'll do some of those, Kristof.
I think in terms of the length, so we'll definitely do that. In terms of the length, like I imagine this podcast a little bit like the radio show you put on in the background while you're doing your dishes or you're in the garden, so that it has some of your attention, but you don't have to really be listening. There's going to be lots of information, but it's more like kind of like music, that it's evocative, or at least this is what I hope that it is, that it's kind of like poetry that puts you in a different mindset, that helps you to think differently about the things that we're all doing, so that you might get new ideas and we might find new ways of doing what we're doing. That's my hope for this. And so rather than like a very condensed, target-oriented way of doing this, I like the long format because it gives this meandering thought pattern a possibility. Or at least that's what I hope that it is. So we'd love to hear if people agree, if that's what you're getting out of this, or if that is not coming through, then no, we also need to know. And then we have to get more condensed.
You know, I'm thinking about some of the themes that we hit over and over, and I think it'd be nice to kind of summarize some of the either recurring themes or some of the things that we learned. I know that one of the things that we came back to several in almost every episode as we were exploring with our guests the scope of their APIs and how they're thinking about APIs. That was at the same time you were thinking about complex adaptive systems, and you came to start seeing the Pronovix dev portal business as, you know, dev portal is actually a subset. It's actually the interface portal. And so we started talking about low code and no code solutions, and people's, I think that most of our guests were thinking about that. There were very few guests who said,
no, this is just REST APIs. Yeah. Nobody said that, actually, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if anyone did, but it definitely resonated more with some than others, but it also depended on their space. And
yeah.
So that was super interesting.
I think it was kind of like getting to the heart of the business value of what APIs, or what it is that we're doing. Because we're talking always as APIs as the physical incarnation of what we're doing. But actually, it is just about creating building blocks for other people to build experiences, like accelerating the building of new experiences, with recombining with a range of different things, often even outside of the control of our organization. Mm-hmm. And I think that's and that value also requires more than APIs, because APIs are a very specific layer of abstraction that is only accessible to certain, like a very specific segment of the business developer population, as Katrien Hazel said it. I asked her to repeat it on the podcast, but I heard her say it the first time on a presentation. Business developers are developers too. And that was like, oh.
Yep.
It's indeed something that we also address in the developer portal, that we make sure that we have a developer audience, but we also make sure that we cater to a business audience as well. So we indeed explain kind of what are these integration methods.
And that's something that we definitely saw, is that we talked to a lot of people following best practices, developing personas that include non-business personas for their dev portals and their API programs. Also, one of the statements was that your marketing messaging has to match your APIs. And if your APIs do things one way and there's cognitive dissonance between what your APIs do and what the documentation says and what the marketing messaging is, that cognitive dissonance and the developers is going to be friction that can make you fail. That was super interesting.
We also had people talk about, like Lorna Jane Mitchell, talk about like DevRel and the evolving role of developer advocacy.
And for me, that's what drives my open source history into today's developer advocacy and digital advocacy, because actually our communities are everywhere and they now can be everywhere more so than ever.
I think also we talked with her about the business value of, making sure that that's kind of like the methodologies and how to change the organization to be better at this. I think we talked about, like, with API spec first methodologies. We talked with Lorna Jane about that, but we also had several other people that were talking about starting this journey or doing this journey. Like very recently, we had Maarten Roosendaal from bol.com also talk about that. I think Sophie Rutard from Euler Hermes, who was also talking about API first. and like her long journey with her company to become like a real API company.
That's how we evolved, and all this is really continuously growing and becoming a very, very important aspect of our business.
So we had a lot of these stories that helped us to explore that journey.
I think that thinking about that conversation with Lorna Jane and those that you mentioned, and also the conversation we had with Gregory and Julia from TomTom about the focus on developer experience and delivering a really good developer experience, and how at TomTom, everyone in the various parts of the product team, there are so many people involved in watching the feedback on the developer portal and taking that feedback into account.
And the feedback that we got is we would appreciate a TomTom dedicated forum, because it can help us to find all the information we need to integrate your APIs in one place. And there's not other questions which can distract us, but it needs to be supported by TomTom specialists as well.
I think one of the things that I heard was the companies who focus on developer experience and making a very high quality experience are the ones who are succeeding. And back to that surprise factor, is your API program surprising you? To me, it's kind of like, okay, you met your goals, whatever your goals were, your success. And then leveling up is whenever people start surprising you. Mm-hmm. And that's where I know that I mentioned several times the idea that you're creating value for your company that doesn't exist within your company. It doesn't exist in the other company. It exists between the companies. And the value is the result of some combination of things that neither of you plan for. There's always the things that you plan for. And it's great when those work out, yes. But it's those new things, new products, new ideas that come out of API programs, particularly whenever you're so customer focused. But we talked on more than one occasion, I know, about discovered affordances. And, that was a really aha moment for me.
I think we also talked about that with Mike Amundsen.
Yes,
I think he actually introduced me to the term affordance.
The affordance exists between the object and the person. Affordances are not intrinsic in the object, right? So those affordances are what we bring. It's the relationship between.
And I had a really hard time in the beginning just understanding it, I heard him use that word first in an API context. And then I was thinking a lot about it. And then also on the podcast, we talked a little bit about that in terms of how can you build something that other people can use to build these experiences. I think one of the episodes that also stood out for me was the one with Zdenek Nemec, who's working on autonomous APIs. And
he would come to the philosophy bar.
He would.
You've got a customer.
Well, also he's doing really out there stuff.
Yes, he is.
When he cracks this nut, because I think it's a when, of autonomous APIs, it's going to be day and night for the industry. I don't think it will replace all APIs, but I think for a really big chunk of traffic, that's going to be a game changer. It's probably going to accelerate API adoption, like a couple of magnitudes, when that kind of technology starts working on a bigger scale.
One of the things that surprised me that I think we talked about with him was discovery is still a problem. And knowing what APIs are out there and available, I know there are a number of people who have tried to catalog APIs, and the discovery of APIs is something that everyone building an API program tends to think about is, how are people going to know that we've got this, and how are we going to get them to use it? The fact that that's still a problem is there's still hay to be made there.
Today, API discovery is based on Google search. unless you already know the brand, right? If I'll tell you a domain you never heard of, like the best insurance API, where do you go unless you work with them, right?
I think thinking back, we had like the whole banking series with Joris Hansen and Matthias Büscher from Deutsche Bank coming on. Like they kind of validated the idea of hackathons also. It had been working for them. I've also heard this, I think Daimler, they're also been doing hackathons.
SRG, SSR.
So there's several organizations that were doing hackathons, and sometimes it feels a little bit, or you might start wondering, like, is this still useful? But if you're using it the right way, it can have a big effect on your organization and on your API program.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting from the conversation with Roberto at SRG SSR, the fact that being a public media organization, they helped drive their roadmap based on the kinds of things that would be discovered through that. So they were using it as a discovery tool, which is really cool.
From our government, we have a mission. They say, hey, you as a public broadcaster, you need to open your data, like archive as an example. Public broadcaster, they have amount of archive data that brings so much value. And we need to open that kind of data.
Then Alexei Akimov from Adyen, he told a story about the Van Gogh, about the painting, and what it meant for him.
But what my son was doing, because it was instruction, put your hand on a painting. So he literally touched the painting, and you can imagine the security guard coming through the home, trying to stop and trying to understand what's going on. But this was
That was like a perspective changer. Yes. How cultural context is so important, because a bunch of things that you don't even think about, that you're assuming that everybody knows, are actually not generally known facts or cultural practices. And that was an interesting one, because I think that has a really big impact on how people are interpreting documentation and how they're interacting with technology we put out there.
That's definitely in line with what Mehdi was talking about, and that I was trying to comment on, the political nature of APIs. That culture aspect is just as important, and it comes through in the APIs. One of the things that the FinTech series that we did made me wonder about is something that has become increasingly clear to me in the time that I've worked with Pronovix and I've spent a lot of time working with people in Europe and spent a lot of time in Europe, and it hadn't really occurred to me at an API level that culture impacts APIs, but I think it does. And if you look at the various vertical slices of culture and society that exist, in some places I would say, well, the US is ahead in this area. And then in other places, Europe is clearly ahead in this area. And a lot of those are culture driven.
We're seeing this now in Japan. Actually, we're working with Japanese customers. Just getting a developer-friendly mindset from management is not straightforward. And these are often cultural things. It's something that I've been trying to wrap my head around last couple of months.
That's interesting, because I know that relationships are very important in business in the East.
Yeah.
And API programs are often, the US may be the extreme, where it's, let's cut out this, introducing ourselves, and let's just go straight to working. Put your credit card in and, get your key and, see you later.
Right.
Yeah, I can only imagine that it's going to be different for companies based in the East.
Yeah. And then, we talked about capabilities, and we had John Musser from Ford Motor Company, who talked about API-driven capabilities and how this is all changing the automotive industry. Software is eating your car, as he said it.
I gave a talk last year in New York on software is eating your car. And, because what's happening is every piece of the car is becoming software enabled, and all those ECUs, all those electronic control units are proliferating within a car, software enabled and software driven. And then you have the telematics unit on the car that connects the car to the cloud.
Which is really, really interesting. That's also been very inspiring to hear that story. Similarly, in the airline industry, when we were talking with Ainoa and Flavio from Lufthansa, although that was also a very philosophical episode where we went very much into purpose and thinking about APIs need to have a purpose. Because if you don't have a purpose, then you can't really have a product. Or at least that's how I remember it.
And say, okay, what is the purpose of APIs? What do you want to achieve? And when we began to ask these questions, people get less in the technical theme and goes more for where they want to go with this, what is behind, what they look for. And that makes totally a different vision of the API. And for us, it's more like what we were looking for.
That was also good. I had actually, in the beginning, I mentioned this part about the transformative conversations. And that was actually something I remembered from a conversation we had with Claire Barrett. She introduced me to this concept of transformative conversations.
Because I've been hearing consistently again and again and again for people's success with an API-enabled change or an API program, that communication is the one thing that they often either underestimated or that they needed to consistently do more and more.
And I knew the concept, but I didn't know that it was like a thing. I think it's been a really good series of episodes. Well, there's a lot more to learn. There's a lot more conversations to be had. From what I've seen, actually, pretty much every organization is growing their digital engagement, and digital has gotten this rocket booster. I heard this scary story that the real wave of adoption is still coming, so that from September, people are actually going to start ordering digital services, which is kind of scary because that means that there's even more demand coming.
It's interesting. I definitely think it's true. When the old man said, "May you live in interesting times," I had no idea that that was a curse. But it's definitely been a challenging year, but it's been inspiring to see companies adjust and adapt, and people adjust and adapt, and do some pretty amazing things. And hopefully these conversations helped with that. I know we'd love to hear from people. If you've been listening to the podcast, give us your feedback. Tell us what you liked, and let Kristof know what you would like to hear more of. I know that the Pronovix, one of the core philosophies is grow and help grow. And that was one of the reasons for doing this podcast. We want to share with the world what we've learned and help other people give their share their knowledge. So let us know what you think.
Thank you for being my co-host, Mark.
It was a pleasure, Kristof. I really, really enjoyed it. I was a little nervous about it at the beginning, and what a joy. It's really been a joy to do. One of my favorite things I did at Pronovix. So best wishes to you and the Pronovix team going forward. Thank you for letting me do this with you. It was awesome. And keep being awesome. Keep doing great things.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
And thank you to our audience for sticking with us. And with that, I think we'll call this episode a wrap.